Hi, I'm Tasha Chapman at Covenant Theological Seminary. I teach education, leadership, and research. So thanks for joining me as we start to answer one tough question. Here's our question. What can I do now to avoid future ministry burnout? Well, here's a quick, pithy answer. I can learn to slow down to reflect. Reflection is a major component to our ability to learn and to grow in self-awareness and a lot of other connections to our sustainability in ministry. But sometimes the best answer to a hard question is to actually ask more questions. So we're going to do that. Why do people leave ministry leadership? Or another way we could ask the same thing is, what are the typical reasons that you hear in your context for people leaving ministry leadership? Well, in the United States, in fact, in most countries I've been to, and I've been to more than a dozen, it seems that ministry leaders, or at least the stories we tell ourselves, is that ministry leaders are largely leading ministries, even though they originally felt called to ministry for a lifetime of vocational service. They're leaving because of sexual sin, or conflict with a team, or lack of resources. Now, that third one is highly problematic, particularly when we hear it, of course, from first world countries. And then recently, in the last 5 years, it seems like we have a fourth typical reason, and that is leadership abuse. A reason that people are removed from ministry leadership, in fact. All right, so if those are the typical reasons, what if there was an underlying, more foundational reason that takes us out of ministry leadership, even though we felt called to pursue that vocation for a lifetime? Well, a possible underlying factor to all those other reasons is lack of self-care. So let's consider, what if self-care is not selfish? What if it's a wise form of self-denial in order to finish the race? Because our personal health impacts the health of our ministries. Vocational ministry is uniquely taxing to our emotional, social, and physical health. In addition, our unique cultures and contexts may be pressing against healthy habits. Our very cultures can be informing us of daily patterns of living that are actually contrary to resilience. Our years of research at Covenant Seminary show that there are specific ways we can help pace ourselves for a lifetime of fruitful ministries. But let's ask another question. What do you think when you hear the word self-care? Or what cultural impressions are attached to this term? Worth pondering. Well, for most of us, we follow our cultures and we attach thoughts of selfishness to the term self-care. And ponder why that may be. How did what used to be a flat term of self-care become connected to selfishness, and we would even say to sin or disobedience to God? Consider ways the Bible would affirm these cultural assumptions, because the Bible certainly would affirm that selfishness is a bad thing and that our self-care should not look like selfishness. But there are also ways that the Bible would challenge this connection. Because, for example, aren't we to love our neighbor as we love ourselves? What idioms or stories do your family and your work culture impress upon you concerning self-care and work, or maybe even self-care versus work? Here's some harmful U.S. cultural sayings and beliefs that, if we're living in the U.S., basically these surround us and press on us regularly when we're in vocational ministry. Try them out. The sacred is separate from the secular. Or, it's heroic to burn out for a good cause. Or, it's heroic to be self-sufficient, not to need help. Or, long work hours increase productivity. Here's a good recent myth. Multitasking and using technology increases productivity. Or, workaholism is a harmless necessity. Or, there's never enough money, time, people, you fill in the blank. When we get into this pattern of telling ourselves that the reason things are the way they are is because there's never enough something. Or failure and error are just simply not acceptable. Another harmful cultural belief in the United States that presses against this idea of self-care. So what might a wise self-care, or to really flip this so that we're associating biblical values to it, what might wise self-stewardship look like? Where we're actually remembering that as we're called to be stewards of all of God's creation, that includes our very selves. Well, here's some ways we might describe it. Maybe it's the routines and lifestyles that bring out the best in us. And I don't mean best as in competition against others, best as in I'm doing well to care for what God has given me in my created person so that I can most use my talents and gifts and the resources he has blessed me with in the best way, right? Or here's a good one that'll preach because of alliteration, if you like alliteration. What if self-stewardship was a rhythm of rest, restoration, and relationships that build resilience into our lives? Because rest and restoration and relationships, these are things we need. We're embodied creatures, we're limited creatures. These are not just a result of the fall. We're relational creatures. These are part of our creational being, our need for these things. What if self-stewardship was the discipline and the discernment of wise stewardship of our gifts and our needs? There's the rub, our needs as well, for the life God has given us. Or the ongoing development and care of our whole person towards maturity in Christ, as every part impacts us spiritually. We can't just say it's okay for one part of us to be worn out and to not be taken care of, as if it doesn't impact the whole of us. We are whole creatures. So our physical, our social, our emotional, our moral volitional self, and even our cognitive self needs stewardship and care for resilience. They're all part of our personhood. Research shows that our personal health directly impacts the health of our ministries. For example, one research study found a direct correlation between pastors' devotional lives and how they handled church conflict. Devotional lives just being one aspect out of many of what wise self-stewardship might involve. Well, part of our findings from our years of research, you can find in our book, Resilient Ministry, what pastors told us about surviving and thriving. And here's some things we found during that research process that can help wake us up to this need. Recent U.S. and Irish studies show that those in vocational ministry have some of the highest work-related stress and worst physical and emotional health of any profession. Or another finding, recent U.S. and Canadian studies show pastors and clergy leaving vocational ministry at alarmingly high rates. And this has been true for the last 2 and more decades. Our 7-year study at Covenant Seminary on what sustains U.S. pastors in ministry found self-care as a category to be one of 5 of the most important areas needing attention for longevity in fruitful ministry. In other words, it's a foundational piece for us that leads then to the likely possibility of those other things we talked about at the beginning that wipe us out of vocational ministry. So why do ministry leaders tend to neglect self-stewardship or self-care? Here's some things we found. We're so busy that we're not self-aware. So there's that direct need for reflection to build up that self-awareness of how are we actually doing in the wholeness of our health and stewardship. 2, we submit to unrealistic expectations from others and, of course, also from ourselves at times. 3, we take too much responsibility to please people, not being willing to disappoint them, so we overwork. 4, we deny the personal impact of being in a caring profession. We pretend we can separate our physical and emotional life from spiritual matters. It's not true. Pride keeps us from respecting our needs and our limitations. And the 7th reason, we minister out of guilt often, or idolatry of work, or to please an angry God, rather than in response to our experience of God's love and grace in our lives. Well, to end this beginning of an answer to our big, hard question, I want to leave you with 3 more questions. How does my lack of wise self-stewardship impact others? What might a biblical theology of self-stewardship sound like? And what could self-stewardship look like in each area of my life? Thank you for contemplating these and blessings as you pursue resilience for a lifetime of fruitful ministry.